The avoidant person operated throughout the relationship with a fundamental assumption that proved catastrophically wrong. They believed you would never actually leave. That no matter how they treated you, no matter how much they withdrew or how inconsistent they were or how many times they pushed you away, you would ultimately stay, would continue to be available, would remain in their life, waiting for them to decide they were ready for more consistent engagement. This assumption was rooted in their observation of your investment in the relationship, your patience with their patterns, your willingness to give multiple chances, your expressions of care and commitment. They interpreted your staying through their difficult behavior as evidence that you lacked the strength or the boundaries to leave, that you needed them too much to walk away, that you were so invested that you'd tolerate anything rather than lose them entirely. This belief that you'd never leave gave them a sense of security and control. They could maintain their defended patterns without fear of real consequences, could withdraw when intimacy felt threatening, knowing you'd still be there when they returned, could take you for granted because they believed your availability was unconditional and permanent. But you proved this assumption devastatingly wrong. You left, you walked away, you revoked their access, and you meant it. You demonstrated that your patience had limits, that your love had boundaries, that you valued yourself enough to choose your own well-being over a relationship that wasn't serving you. This departure has shattered the avoidant person's entire framework for understanding the relationship and understanding you. The person they thought would never leave has left and is staying gone. And this reality has triggered a psychological response in the avoidant that is intense and consuming. They're obsessing over you in ways they never obsessed when you were available. They're watching your life with a compulsive focus they never showed when they had access to you. They're monitoring your every move through whatever channels are available to them with a desperation that reveals how profoundly your departure has affected them. The obsession is not a healthy rekindling of feelings or genuine transformation of their capacity. It's a defensive response to a loss of control, a frantic attempt to maintain a connection to someone who has severed connection, a manifestation of their psychological crisis that the person they believed they could always count on is now genuinely gone and genuinely unavailable. They're watching you nonstop because they cannot accept the reality of your absence, because they're hoping to see a sign that you miss them or that you're struggling without them, because they need to maintain some form of access, even if it's only through observation from a distance, because their entire sense of security has been destroyed by your departure. And watching you is a desperate attempt to restore some feeling of connection or control or understanding of what's happening. The shock of your departure shattered their assumptions. The avoidant person's current obsessive watching of you stems directly from the profound shock your departure created. Shock that originated from the complete contradiction between what they believed would happen and what actually happened. Understanding this shock and how it shattered their assumptions reveals why they're now obsessing over you in ways they never did when you were actually available to them. The avoidant person genuinely believed you would never leave because they had extensive evidence in their perception that you were too invested, too patient, too understanding to actually walk away. They watched you stay through their withdrawal, through their hot and cold behavior, through their emotional unavailability, through multiple cycles of them pushing you away and pulling you back. Each time you stayed despite their patterns, each time you gave them another chance, each time you chose to work through difficulties rather than leaving, they received confirmation that you wouldn't leave. They observed your deep investment in the relationship, your obvious care for them, your patience with their process. All of this created a picture in their mind of someone who was committed to staying regardless of circumstances, someone whose love or need for them was strong enough to override any frustration or pain their patterns caused. This picture felt like a solid understanding of who you were and what they could expect from you. The avoidant person's assumption that you'd never leave was also rooted in their need to believe it. in their psychological requirement that you be the constant that allowed them to maintain their inconsistent patterns without facing consequences. Their entire defensive structure was built on being able to withdraw when intimacy felt threatening and to return when loneliness became overwhelming. And this structure required that the other person remain available throughout these cycles. You served as their secure base in a deeply ironic way. Not in the healthy attachment sense of a secure base that supports exploration, but in the dysfunctional sense of a person they believed they could always return to, a person whose availability was so reliable they could take it completely for granted. Their belief that you'd never leave was not just an observation, but was a psychological necessity that allowed them to maintain their patterns without anxiety about permanent loss. When you actually left, when you walked away and made clear you were staying gone, the avoidant person experienced a shock that was not just surprise, but was a complete shattering of their framework for understanding you and the relationship. Everything they believed about you was proven wrong in a single action. The patient, understanding, invested person who stayed through everything suddenly demonstrated boundaries and strength they didn't know you possessed. The person who seemed unable to leave demonstrated that you were fully capable of leaving and staying gone. The person whose love seemed unconditional demonstrated that there were, in fact, conditions and limits. This reversal of their understanding was psychologically destabilizing because it meant they had fundamentally misunderstood the situation, had operated on false assumptions, had taken for granted something that was never actually guaranteed. The shock of your departure was intensified by the manner in which you left, particularly if you left with calm finality rather than with the dramatic emotion or the desperate pursuit they might have expected. The avoidant person likely anticipated that if you ever did reach a breaking point, you would leave with a big emotional display, with anger or with tearful pleas for them to change, with some dramatic exit that would give them an opportunity to respond or to talk you out of it. But instead, you likely left with dignity and calm decisiveness that was far more final and far more threatening. You didn't fight for them. You didn't beg them to change. You didn't give them the emotional reaction that would have confirmed they still mattered intensely to you. You simply decided you were done, and you acted on that decision with strength and clarity. This calm, decisive departure was more shocking than an emotional exit would have been because it communicated that you had processed your decision thoroughly, that you meant it completely, that you weren't leaving in a moment of emotional reactivity that might reverse, but were leaving from a place of genuine resolution and closure. The shock was further compounded by the completeness of your departure and your maintenance of no contact without wavering. The avoidant person might have experienced previous relationships where partners threatened to leave or did leave, but then came back or maintained contact that allowed for reconciliation. They might have assumed that even if you did leave, you'd maintain a friendship or respond to their eventual reach-outs or leave the door open for future possibility. But you didn't do any of these things. You left completely. You blocked them or didn't respond to their attempts to contact you. You made yourself genuinely unavailable. You closed every door and you maintained that closure. This completeness of your departure made clear that this wasn't temporary distance or strategic withdrawal, but was a genuine ending that you intended to be permanent. The shock of this completeness continues to reverberate because they keep expecting you to soften or to respond or to show some sign that you're not actually completely done. But you continue to prove that you are actually completely done. The shock created a psychological crisis for the avoidant person because it forced recognition of multiple uncomfortable truths simultaneously. That they had completely misunderstood you and your limits, that their patterns had real and permanent consequences, that they were not as safe or as in control as they believed, that they had lost something they assumed they'd always have access to, and that their defensive strategies failed to protect them from the very pain they were designed to prevent. This crisis is what's driving their current obsessive behavior. They're trying to process and manage a shock that destabilized their entire psychological system, trying to understand how they could have been so wrong, trying to regain some sense of control or understanding in a situation where they have neither. The obsession manifests in their constant monitoring. The avoidant person's obsession with you is not remaining internal or abstract, but is manifesting in specific, concrete behaviors of constant monitoring and watching that reveal the intensity of their preoccupation and the extent to which they cannot let you go despite having pushed you away. Understanding how this obsessive monitoring manifests reveals both the depth of their crisis and the ways they're attempting to maintain connection to you even in your absence. The obsession manifests most obviously in their constant checking of your social media profiles if they have any access to them, visiting your pages multiple times per day to see if you've posted anything new, analyzing your posts for clues about your emotional state or your life circumstances. They're looking at your photos to see if you appear happy or sad, reading your captions for hidden meanings, noting who's liking or commenting on your posts, trying to piece together a picture of your life without them from whatever fragments are publicly available. This checking is compulsive. They find themselves returning to your profiles even when they just checked minutes earlier, even when they know there won't be new content, even when the checking makes them feel worse rather than better. The compulsion is driven by a need to maintain some form of connection to you, to feel like they know what's happening in your life, even though they've lost the right to direct knowledge, to seek evidence that either confirms you miss them or proves you've moved on so they can stop hoping. The obsession manifests in their monitoring of your activity through any technological means available, tracking when you're online, noting when you read their messages, if read receipts are visible, creating burner accounts, or using friends' accounts to view content you've blocked them from seeing. They might notice patterns in your online activity, what times you're typically active, whether your activity patterns have changed since the breakup, whether you've blocked them on new platforms. They're paying attention to details they never attended to when they had direct access to you, noticing small changes or updates they would have ignored when the relationship existed. This technological stalking is an attempt to maintain surveillance that gives them the illusion of still being connected to your life, still knowing you, still having access even when all legitimate access has been revoked. The obsession manifests in their pumping mutual friends for information about you, asking casual questions designed to elicit details about your life, your emotional state, whether you've mentioned them, whether you're dating anyone new. They might frame these questions as casual interest or concern for your well-being, but the frequency and the intensity of their need for information reveals it's much more than casual. They're trying to gather intelligence that they cannot gather directly, trying to construct a picture of your life and your state of mind from secondhand reports, trying to understand whether you're suffering or thriving, whether you miss them or have completely forgotten them, whether there's any possibility you might be open to reconnection. Some avoidants might even pressure mutual friends to pass along messages or to advocate for them, using friends as intermediaries because direct contact is blocked. The obsession manifests in their drive-bys or showing up in places where they know you might be, creating accidental encounters that aren't actually accidental, but are deliberate attempts to see you, to be in your presence, to create an opportunity for interaction. They might drive past your home or your workplace more frequently than any legitimate route would require. They might show up at the gym or the coffee shop or the social venues they know you frequent. They might attend events or gatherings they know you'll be at, even if they wouldn't normally attend such events. These physical proximity-seeking behaviors reveal that online monitoring isn't sufficient for their obsession, that they need to see you in person, to occupy the same physical space, to have a chance of an actual encounter, even if that encounter would be awkward or unwelcome. The obsession manifests in their constant analysis and reanalysis of your last conversations, your final messages, any interactions they've had with you since the breakup, searching for hidden meanings or for indications of your true feelings. They replay conversations in their mind repeatedly, examining every word choice, every tone shift, every pause. If you've responded to any of their reach outs, they analyze those responses obsessively. Did you respond too quickly or too slowly? Was your tone warm or cold? Did your word choice suggest softening or a firm boundary? Were there any openings they could exploit? If you haven't responded, they analyze the silence. What does it mean? How long will it last? What would break through it? This constant analysis is an attempt to decode you, to understand what you're thinking and feeling, to find some angle or approach that might change the situation in their favor. The obsession manifests in their altered daily routines and priorities that now center on watching you rather than on living their own life. They might check your social media first thing in the morning and last thing at night. They might structure their day around times they're hoping you'll post or around opportunities to see you. They might neglect their work or their responsibilities because they're consumed with monitoring you. Their entire focus has shifted from their own life to your life, from their own activities to tracking your activities, from their own growth to desperate attention to your growth and movement forward without them. This reorientation of their life around watching you reveals how completely the obsession has taken over their psychological space. The obsession manifests in their saving and revisiting old photos, messages, and mementos from the relationship, consuming old content compulsively as a way of maintaining connection to who you were and what you shared. They scroll through old conversations, reading and rereading messages from when things were good. They look at photos from the relationship repeatedly. They might keep gifts you gave them in prominent places. They might visit places that were significant in the relationship. This backward-focused behavior is an attempt to keep the relationship alive in their mind, to prevent themselves from fully accepting that it's over, to maintain a feeling of connection even when present connection has been severed. What drives their compulsive need to watch your every move? The avoidant person's obsessive watching of you is driven by specific psychological needs and fears that make the monitoring feel compulsive and necessary despite its unhealthy nature. Understanding what drives this obsessive behavior reveals the internal experience of the avoidant person and the functions this watching serves in their psychological system. The compulsive watching is driven by their need to maintain some form of control in a situation where they've lost all actual control. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant controlled the distance, the pacing, the level of commitment. Your departure stripped them of this control entirely. You made a decision without their input. You're living your life without their involvement. You're unavailable to them regardless of what they want. This loss of control is intolerable to an avoidant psychological system which organizes itself around maintaining control as a primary defense against vulnerability. The obsessive watching is an attempt to restore an illusion of control. If they know what you're doing, if they can observe your life, if they can predict your moves, they feel they have some purchase on the situation, even when they objectively have no control over you or your choices. The compulsive watching is driven by their need to know whether you're suffering or thriving, whether you miss them or have moved on, because your state determines their own emotional state and their sense of themselves. If you're suffering, if you're showing signs of missing them, if you're not thriving, this would confirm that the relationship mattered, that they mattered, that their loss has had an impact. It would also create hope that you might be open to reconciliation. But if you're thriving, if you're clearly happy without them, if you're moving forward successfully, this is deeply threatening to their ego and forces a painful recognition that they were not as necessary to your happiness as they believed. The obsessive watching is an attempt to gather this intelligence so they know how to feel about themselves and about the situation, though the information they gather usually creates more pain than clarity. The compulsive watching is driven by their need to see evidence of their importance to you, to confirm that they mattered and that losing them has had a meaningful impact on your life. The avoidant person's sense of their own worth is often tied to mattering to others, even while they maintain distance that prevents others from mattering too much to them. They need to know that you think about them, that you miss them, that their absence is felt. The watching is searching for evidence of this importance. Are you posting things that might be about them? Are you appearing sad in ways that suggest you're mourning the loss? Are you referencing the relationship or the breakup in any way that would confirm they still occupy space in your mind and heart? The desperate need for this confirmation reveals how much their sense of themselves is destabilized by your departure and by the possibility that you might have simply moved on without looking back. The compulsive watching is driven by their fear that you're with someone else, that you've replaced them, that a new relationship is providing what they couldn't provide and is making clear that they were inadequate. This fear is torturous, but they cannot stop seeking information about it because not knowing feels worse than knowing, because their imagination creates scenarios that might be worse than reality, because they need to know the truth, even when the truth will hurt. They're watching for any signs of a new relationship, new people in your photos, changes in your routine that might suggest someone else's presence, a happiness or glow that might indicate new romance. The discovery of a new relationship would be devastating, but would also provide a certain closure, would explain your unavailability, would give them a concrete reason for why reconciliation isn't possible, rather than leaving them with uncertainty. The compulsive watching is driven by their inability to accept the finality of your departure and their hope that they'll see signs of softening or openness that would create an opportunity for them to attempt reconnection. Despite all evidence that you're done, despite your clear boundaries and your lack of response to their attempts at contact, the avoidant is hoping to catch you in a moment of weakness or nostalgia, hoping to see a post or signal that suggests you're remembering the good times or reconsidering your decision, hoping to find an opening they could exploit. The watching is constant vigilance for this opportunity, waiting for a crack in your resolve that would allow them to slip back into your life. This hope prevents them from accepting reality and moving forward, keeping them stuck in obsessive monitoring that serves their denial. The compulsive watching is driven by their need to understand what happened and how they could have been so wrong about you and your limits, searching your behavior and your life for clues that would help them make sense of their own miscalculation. They're trying to reconcile the patient, understanding person who stayed through so much with the strong, decisive person who left and stayed gone. They're looking for an explanation for this transformation. Did something specific trigger it? Was there a final straw they missed? Were there warnings they didn't heed? Did you change? Or were you always capable of this strength and they simply failed to see it? The watching is an investigative attempt to solve the mystery of how they could have been so wrong, though the answer is simpler than they want to accept. You reached your limit, you chose yourself, you valued your well-being over the relationship, all of which they didn't believe you were capable of or willing to do. The compulsive watching is driven by their addiction to you and to the feeling of being connected to you, attempting to get a fix of connection through observation. Since actual connection is no longer possible, the avoidant person discovered through the relationship that connection with you felt good in ways that connection with others doesn't feel good. You provided something they need at a deep level: acceptance, understanding, safety. Losing direct access to these things has created withdrawal-like symptoms, and the obsessive watching is an attempt to ease the withdrawal by maintaining some form of contact, however one-sided and insufficient. They're addicted to you, and they're attempting to maintain their addiction through whatever means are available, even when those means don't actually provide the satisfaction they're seeking. The compulsive watching is driven by their inability to direct their attention and energy anywhere else because their psychological system is stuck in crisis mode, responding to your departure, unable to engage with the present moment or with their own life because all resources are devoted to processing the loss and attempting to restore what was broken. The avoidant person cannot focus on work, cannot engage with hobbies, cannot invest in new relationships, cannot move forward with their life because the crisis of losing you is consuming all their bandwidth. The watching is both a symptom of this crisis and a perpetuation of it. They're stuck watching you because they cannot move on, and they cannot move on because they're stuck watching you, creating a vicious cycle that ensures they remain trapped. Why their obsessive watching changes nothing about the reality. The avoidant person's constant obsessive watching of you, while revealing the depth of their crisis and their feelings, does not change any of the fundamental realities that make reconciliation unlikely or that make their current behavior ultimately futile. Understanding why their obsession changes nothing protects you from being moved by their attention or from mistaking their obsessive monitoring for genuine transformation or readiness for a healthy relationship. Their obsessive watching changes nothing because watching is passive consumption of information about you rather than active work on themselves and their patterns. The avoidant is spending enormous time and energy monitoring your life, but this monitoring is not therapeutic work. It's not addressing their attachment wounds. It's not developing their capacity for intimacy. It's not challenging their defensive patterns. It's not building skills for emotional presence and communication. The obsessive watching is avoidance behavior dressed up as connection seeking. They're focused on you and your life as a way of not focusing on their own need for growth and change. All the hours spent watching you are hours not spent in therapy, not spent doing healing work, not spent developing the capacity that would actually be required if they were to have a chance at a healthy relationship with you or anyone else.